The auditorium fell silent as my husband Danny stood up during our son's graduation and announced, "Flora, I can't live this lie anymore. I'm leaving you for Amy, and we're taking the kids." 500 people watched in shock as he walked toward the exit. But what he didn't know was that I'd been planning my own announcement for months. I smiled, walked to the podium, and said, "Since we're sharing family secrets, Danny," I pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Let me tell everyone about the 3 families you've been supporting with stolen money." Amy Goldfine's face went completely white as she realized her perfect new life was built on criminal proceeds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That moment was the culmination of 18 months of careful investigation, strategic planning, and emotional preparation. It was when Danny Harrington, my husband of 22 years, discovered that the quiet, submissive wife he thought he could discard had become something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The Westfield High School gymnasium was packed beyond capacity that humid June afternoon. Graduation Day 2024 was supposed to be the proudest moment of our family's life. Our son Sebastian was valedictorian, headed to Harvard on full scholarship, the golden child who had exceeded every expectation. I had spent weeks preparing for this day. My navy blue dress was carefully chosen, the celebration dinner at Romano's booked for 12 people, including Sebastian's grandparents from Phoenix. The professional photographer was ready to capture Sebastian receiving his diploma, images we'd treasure forever. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had planned every detail except Danny's betrayal. But perhaps that's not accurate. Deep down, I had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. The late-night phone calls that ended when I entered rooms, the mysterious business trips with no calendar entries, the emotional distance that made our bed feel like different zip codes. Danny Harrington was a respected financial advisor at Brenner & Associates, managing retirement accounts for half our affluent suburb of Millbrook Heights. For 22 years, he'd been the picture of stability. Our neighbors pointed to us as the ideal family: successful husband, devoted wife, brilliant son, beautiful home on Maple Street with perfect lawn and golden retriever named Buster. What they didn't know was that for 18 months, Danny had been living a triple life that made our existence a carefully constructed facade. The conversation I'd overheard 3 nights earlier changed everything. Danny in his office at 11 p.m., "Amy baby, I promise it's almost over. After Sebastian's graduation, I'm telling Flora everything. We can finally be a real family, you, me, Tony, and little Tammy." Tony and Tammy, names I'd never heard, belonging to children I didn't know existed. Children who called my husband Daddy. That night, I didn't confront him. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. I would find out the complete truth before saying anything. The private investigator I hired was Linda Abrams. Within 6 weeks, she assembled a portfolio that read like a thriller. Danny wasn't just having an affair, he was running sophisticated embezzlement, funding not 1 but 2 separate households. Amy Goldfine was a 34-year-old dental hygienist with 2 children. Danny had been supporting them for over 2 years, paying rent, private school tuition, even listing himself as emergency contact on school records. But Amy wasn't the only woman. Linda found evidence of 3 other relationships, each involving financial support and marriage promises. The money came from client accounts, elderly retirees who trusted him with life savings. As Sebastian's name was called, and he walked across the stage, I touched the manila envelope containing 18 months of investigation. If Danny wanted a public stage for his announcement, I would give him one he'd never forget. The only question was whether he'd have the courage to follow through. As it turned out, Danny had many flaws, but lack of courage wasn't one of them. Unfortunately for him, neither was mine. To understand Danny's betrayal, you need to know what our life looked like before the cracks appeared. The Harrington family was the success story real estate agents used to sell houses in Millbrook Heights. We were proof the American dream lived in our corner of suburban Connecticut. Our story began 23 years ago at a Yale coffee shop. I was finishing my master's in education. Danny completing his MBA in finance. We were convinced we had our futures mapped with mathematical precision. Danny would climb the corporate ladder, I'd teach until we had children, then build the greeting card family. That plan worked exactly as imagined. Danny landed his Brenner and Associates position straight from graduate school, methodically working up through ranks. I taught at Millbrook Heights High, helping teenagers navigate Shakespeare, while secretly hoping to help my own children with homework someday. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed. Garden ceremony at Millbrook Country Club. 200 guests, white roses and baby's breath. Danny impossibly handsome in charcoal tuxedo. My mother cried during vows. My father welcomed Danny into our family. Everyone agreed we were perfectly matched. Those photos show two people genuinely believing they were beginning happily ever after. We bought our Maple Street house when I was pregnant with Sebastian. Colonial revival with 4 bedrooms, kitchen overlooking the backyard where we imagined children playing on swings, chasing fireflies. Danny insisted on large down payment for reasonable mortgage, demonstrating the financial responsibility that made his later crimes so shocking. Sebastian's birth defined our early marriage. After 3 years trying and 1 devastating miscarriage, holding our son felt like winning the lottery and discovering life's meaning simultaneously. Danny cried when the doctor placed Sebastian in his arms, whispering promises about baseball, math homework, being the father who'd make his son proud. For Sebastian's first 10 years, Danny kept those promises. He coached Little League weekends, attended every school play and science fair, turned bedtime into elaborate ritual with multiple books and silly character voices. Sebastian adored his father, following him like a shadow, announcing he wanted to be exactly like Daddy. I had stopped teaching when Sebastian was born, becoming full-time mother and household manager with classroom dedication. Our days had comfortable rhythm, breakfast together, before Danny left for work, playgroups and errands with Sebastian, 6 o'clock family dinners, homework help, and bedtime stories. I organized social calendars, managed finances, maintained our home, created the stable environment where brilliant children flourish. Danny was attentive during those years. Random Tuesday flowers, surprise Vermont weekend getaways, never missing opportunities to tell people how proud he was of his family. Friends joked we were disgustingly happy, the couple making everyone else feel inadequate. Weekends were sacred. Saturday morning pancakes and cartoons, followed by Danny's planned adventures, hiking state park trails, Hartford museums, summer beaches or winter skiing. Sunday afternoons meant family dinners at my parents', where Sebastian showed off school projects, and Danny helped my father with home improvements. Our social circle consisted of neighborhood families and Danny's Brenner colleagues. We hosted backyard barbecues, attended country club cocktail parties, took annual vacations with 3 couples whose children were Sebastian's age. I was particularly close with Margaret Chen, whose son Kevin was Sebastian's best friend, and Sarah Williams, whose husband shared Danny's golf passion. Financially, we were comfortable but not extravagant. Danny's income maintained our lifestyle without stress, built Sebastian's college fund, contributed generously to retirement accounts. We drove reliable cars, took 1 annual family vacation, lived within means while enjoying occasional luxury dinners or New York theater. The cracks began so subtly, I dismissed them as natural marital evolution. Danny started working later, explaining Brenner's expanding client base required extra hours. He traveled more frequently, conferences and client meetings requiring overnight Boston, New York, Philadelphia trips. Our intimacy gradually diminished. Danny seemed distracted during family dinners, constantly checking his phone with vague client emergency explanations. Weekend adventures became less frequent, replaced by Danny's work catch-up or important client golf. When I suggested romantic 20th anniversary getaway, Danny insisted taking time off during crucial career periods would be irresponsible. Changes were so gradual, I adapted without recognizing significance. When Danny stopped bringing flowers, I told myself grand gestures mattered less than reliable provision. When he moved to the guest room, claiming my restless sleep affected work concentration, I convinced myself many couples made similar practical arrangements. Looking back, Danny was already living double lives during our marriage's final years. Late nights weren't at the office but in apartments I'd never seen. Business trips included personal stops, unrelated to Brenner and Associates. Family dinner distraction wasn't about client portfolios, but managing complex logistics of multiple relationships and covering financial tracks of increasingly sophisticated embezzlement. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But then, sitting in our beautiful home with our exceptional son, planning graduation celebrations, I believed we were experiencing mature marriage challenges. I had no idea the man I'd loved over 2 decades had become a stranger. Understanding who Danny Harrington was, or who I thought he was, is essential to comprehending his deception's magnitude. The man I married wasn't an obvious villain. He was charismatic, intelligent, genuinely gifted at making people feel special and understood. These qualities that drew me to him were the same ones he'd later use to manipulate multiple women and countless clients. Danny grew up in Hartford as the youngest of 3 boys in middle-class Irish Catholic family. His father worked for the post office, his mother was a school secretary, and they instilled fierce work ethic and unwavering belief that success was earned through dedication and integrity. Danny often told how his parents sacrificed for his private school, working second jobs and skipping vacations for opportunities they'd never had. At 6 feet tall with sandy brown hair and bright blue eyes, Danny possessed natural charm that made people gravitate toward him. He remembered everyone's names, asked thoughtful life questions, had uncanny ability to make whoever he spoke with feel like the most important person in the room. These social skills made him incredibly effective as financial advisor. Clients trusted him with life savings because he genuinely seemed to care about their dreams and fears. What I didn't understand until later was that Danny's empathy was performative rather than authentic. He could read people's emotional needs and respond appropriately, but responses were calculated rather than genuine. He told clients exactly what they wanted to hear about financial futures, just as he told each girlfriend exactly what they wanted to hear about relationships. Sebastian inherited the best of both parents' qualities while avoiding our weaknesses. At 18, he was 6'2" with my dark hair and Danny's blue eyes, making teenage girls stare and basketball coaches recruit him despite complete sports disinterest. His passion was mathematics, specifically theoretical physics, possessing brilliant analytical mind that solved complex equations while carrying casual conversations about unrelated topics. Sebastian's academic achievements were staggering even by Millbrook Heights standards. Perfect 4.0 GPA throughout high school, while taking every advanced placement course available. SAT scores in 99th percentile. College essay about using mathematical models to predict climate change, impressed Harvard's admissions committee, already accepted into their accelerated physics program with full funding. Beyond intellectual gifts, Sebastian was genuinely kind and thoughtful. He tutored struggling classmates without being asked, volunteered at local animal shelter, never gave us typical teenage rebellion moments. His biggest defiance was choosing physics over pre-med, disappointing Danny's doctor in the family dream, but pursuing passion with characteristic determination. Amy Goldfine represented everything I was not, surely part of her appeal for Danny, where I was cautious and practical. Amy was spontaneous and adventurous. At 34, 8 years younger than me, with platinum blonde hair, green eyes, and effortless sex appeal that made men turn around on streets. She worked as dental hygienist in Riverside, next town over, and according to Linda's investigation, had reputation for dating married men who promised to leave wives. Amy was single mother to Tony, 8, and Tammy, 5 children from previous relationship with man who disappeared when Tammy was born. She lived in modest apartment complex, drove 10-year-old Honda Civic, struggled financially until Danny entered her life, and began providing support that transformed her circumstances overnight. What made Amy particularly dangerous was her intelligence. She wasn't naive victim, believing Danny's promises about leaving his wife. According to phone records Linda obtained, Amy actively pressured Danny to make good on commitments, threatening to expose their relationship if he didn't follow through on divorce timeline. She knew about his embezzlement because he'd confided creative financing solutions becoming willing accomplice for financial security. Tony and Tammy were innocent casualties in adult drama. Tony was bright, energetic second grader who played Little League and loved video games. Tammy was kindergartner who collected stuffed animals and wanted to be veterinarian. According to school records, Danny attended parent-teacher conferences, school plays, sporting events for both children, playing devoted stepfather while maintaining faithful husband facade with me. Linda's investigation uncovered evidence. Danny had been telling Tony and Tammy he'd officially adopt them soon. They'd all be real family once he settled complicated legal matters with his ex-wife. The children, desperate for father figure, embraced Danny completely, calling him Daddy Danny, and drawing future family pictures including him prominently. But Amy wasn't Danny's only secret family. Linda identified at least 2 other women believing they were in exclusive relationships with Danny Harrington. Linda Brenner, 38-year-old divorced real estate agent, who thought Danny was her 6-month boyfriend, had no idea he was married. Danny paid her son's private school tuition, promised to help her buy a house. Then Tammy Abrams, 29-year-old teacher seeing Danny over a year, believed he was separated from his wife, living in temporary apartment while finalizing divorce. Danny had given her engagement ring. They'd been planning wedding for following spring. Each woman represented different aspects of Danny's compartmentalized life. With Amy, devoted stepfather and provider. With Linda, successful businessman ready for sophisticated commitment. With Tammy, romantic partner planning their future. And with me, he remained stable husband and father, maintaining our family's public image while secretly planning our destruction. Understanding Danny's character made his planned public humiliation even more cruel. This wasn't impulsive passion decision, but calculated move by someone who'd lost ability to consider anyone's needs but his own. Danny's behavior changes didn't happen overnight. They crept into our marriage so gradually that I adapted to each new normal without recognizing the emerging pattern. Looking back, the warning signs began almost 2 years before graduation day. Subtle shifts I rationalized because I couldn't imagine the alternative. The first change was Danny's relationship with his phone. For 20 marriage years, his cell phone had been practical, checking lunch messages, answering important client calls, but never dominating attention. Suddenly, around Sebastian's junior year start, Danny's phone became a body extension. He carried it everywhere, checked constantly, developed habits of tilting screens away when text messages arrived. Initially, I attributed this to changing business nature. Brenner and Associates was expanding client base, and Danny often explained younger clients expected immediate responses about market fluctuations or investment concerns. "These millennials think everything's urgent," he'd say with exasperated smile when phones buzzed during dinner. They text about portfolios like ordering pizza, but phone behavior became increasingly secretive. Danny started taking calls in his car before entering the house, claiming he needed finishing client conversations without family noise distraction. He began showering immediately after work, leaving phones on bathroom counters where I couldn't see incoming messages. Most tellingly, he started sleeping with phones under pillows, explaining concerns about missing emergency calls from elderly clients needing immediate assistance. The second warning sign was Danny's sudden appearance interest. My husband had always been attractive, but grooming routines had been consistent and unremarkable for 2 decades. Shower, shave, basic 6-week haircuts, same wedding cologne. Around the same time phone habits changed, Danny began paying much more attention to his reflection. He started getting haircut every 3 weeks at expensive Hartford salon instead of local barbershop he'd used for years. He bought new cologne, sophisticated and expensive, smelling nothing like familiar scent I associated with him. His wardrobe evolved from conservative business attire to fashionable, fitted clothing accentuating his physique. Most surprisingly, Danny joined a gym and began working out with marathon training dedication. He'd leave at 5:30 a.m. for hour-long sessions, returning energized and talking about fitness goals with odd urgency for late 40s man. When I suggested working out together, or joining the same gym, Danny dismissed ideas, claiming early morning routines worked better for his schedule, and he preferred exercising alone to clear his head. The third change was in our intimate life, both physical and emotional. Danny had always been an attentive husband, but our physical relationship began deteriorating in ways that felt gradual and absolute. He stopped initiating intimacy, and when I approached him, often claimed being too tired from work or too distracted by client concerns to focus on our relationship. More concerning than physical distance was emotional withdrawal. Danny had always shared day details, complained about difficult clients, celebrated successful investments, asked my input on work decisions. Suddenly his job became mysterious black box he couldn't or wouldn't discuss meaningfully. "How was your day?"
Became question eliciting increasingly vague responses. Busy or complicated, or lots of client drama, I can't really get into. When I pressed for details, Danny became irritated, suggesting I wouldn't understand his work complexities, or preferred leaving business matters at office to protect family time. Our conversations, once ranging from silly neighborhood gossip observations to serious Sebastian future discussions, became superficial logistics exchanges. Danny would ask about Sebastian's schedule, confirm dinner plans, request I handle household responsibilities, but deeper connection sustaining our 20-year marriage was quietly disappearing. The fourth warning sign was Danny's money relationship, both ours and his general spending attitudes. Danny had always been financially responsible, even conservative, preferring saving for goals rather than impulse purchases. He taught Sebastian budgeting importance, insisted we maintain 6-month emergency funds, even during tight early marriage years. But Danny's spending patterns began changing in subtle ways that didn't immediately raise flags. He started paying for seemingly unnecessary services, premium car wash service, expensive dry cleaning for clothes, previously going to local cleaners, personal shopping service, selecting and delivering men's clothing. When I questioned expenses, Danny explained his professional image was increasingly important, competing for high net worth clients. More concerning was Danny's newfound generosity toward people outside immediate family. He began making substantial charitable donations to organizations I'd never heard him mention, contributing to political campaigns, not aligning with previously expressed views, offering to pay for dinners and entertainment when socializing with other couples, insisting business was good, and we should enjoy our success. The fifth change was Danny's schedule and whereabouts explanations. Business trips, once occasional, became frequent and lasted longer than seemed necessary for stated purposes. Client dinners, previously scheduled during normal business hours, began extending late into evenings and sometimes included weekend obligations. Danny started attending conferences and professional development seminars, requiring overnight travel to Boston, New York, Philadelphia. When I expressed interest joining weekend trips combining business with pleasure, Danny always had reasons why my presence would be inappropriate or distracting. Most tellingly, Danny's schedule explanations became increasingly detailed and defensive. When I expressed whose nubertit sendable painder effort above, yes says Haitian percended ord. Instead of simply saying client dinner, he'd provide elaborate backstories about client family situations, investment concerns, personal preferences requiring specific restaurants or entertainment venues. These explanations felt rehearsed, as if Danny worked from scripts rather than recounting actual experiences. The sixth warning sign was Danny's changing relationship with Sebastian and family daily life involvement. Danny had always been engaged father, helping with homework, attending school events, making time for father-son activities, despite busy work schedules. But as Sebastian's senior year approached, Danny began missing important moments with increasing frequency. Looking back, each change represented Danny's need to manage multiple relationships and maintain elaborate deceptions. Phone secrecy was necessary, coordinating with Amy, Linda, and Tammy without arousing suspicion. Appearance improvements were designed attracting and maintaining younger women's interest. Emotional withdrawal was Danny's guilt reduction method by creating distance from family he planned abandoning. By the time I understood what these changes meant, Danny had already decided our marriage was over and was simply waiting for the right moment to execute his exit strategy. Graduation wasn't just going to be Sebastian's big day, it was going to be Danny's final performance as my husband. The moment that shattered my denial came on a Tuesday evening in March, exactly 3 months before Sebastian's graduation. I had been living in willful blindness,
accepting Danny's explanations and rationalizing mounting evidence that something fundamental had changed in our marriage. But truth has a way of forcing itself into light, regardless of how desperately we try keeping it buried. Sebastian had been accepted to Harvard the previous week, and we were supposed to be celebrating as a family. I had planned special dinner, Danny's favorite pot roast with traditional sides, Sebastian's preferred chocolate cake from Downtown Bakery, champagne Danny had been saving for significant occasions. It should have been one of those perfect family moments we'd remember and discuss for years. Instead, Danny called at 4 p.m. saying he'd be late due to emergency client meeting. The Andersons are freaking out about market volatility, he explained with that patient exasperation tone I'd become accustomed to hearing. I need walking them through their portfolio and reassuring them their retirement is secure. You and Sebastian go ahead and eat. I'll grab something on the way home. Sebastian and I ate dinner together, discussing his Harvard excitement and nervousness about leaving home for the first time. My 18-year-old son was more emotionally mature than many adults, and he'd clearly noticed tension between his parents even if he hadn't commented directly. "Mom," Sebastian said as we cleared dinner dishes, "is everything okay with you and Dad? He seems really stressed lately, and you seem worried about something." I smiled and gave him the same reassuring response I'd been giving myself for months. "Your father is just working very hard to make sure we're financially secure. The investment business is demanding, especially with economic uncertainty. Everything is fine, sweetheart. We're just dealing with normal life stress." But even speaking those words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Normal life stress didn't explain Danny's emotional absence or growing distance between us. Normal work pressure didn't account for secretive phone calls or behavior changes accumulating for nearly 2 years. After Sebastian went upstairs for college scholarship application work, I found myself alone in our kitchen, staring at untouched place setting I'd prepared for Danny. The pot roast was getting cold, champagne remained unopened, and our planned celebration was turning into another evening of disappointment and excuses. I decided to surprise Danny by bringing him dinner at his office. Brenner and Associates was only 15 minutes away, and I thought it would be romantic showing up with his favorite meal plate and perhaps sharing quiet toast to Sebastian's achievement in Danny's office after his client meeting concluded. I packed food in containers, grabbed champagne in 2 glasses, and drove downtown feeling optimistic about salvaging our celebration. The Brenner and Associates building was sleek, modern structure in the financial district, and I'd visited Danny's office countless times over years for holiday parties, client appreciation events, and casual lunch meetings. But when I arrived at the building at 8:30 p.m., the parking lot was nearly empty, Danny's BMW was nowhere to be seen, and Brenner and Associates' office windows were dark. I sat in my car for several minutes, checking and rechecking building directory, wondering if Danny had moved to different office, or if client meeting was taking place at alternate location. I called Danny's cell phone, planning to ask where he was so I could bring him dinner, but calls went directly to voicemail. His outgoing message was professional and brief. "You've reached Danny Harrington at Brenner and Associates. Please leave detailed message, and I'll return your call during normal business hours." Confused and increasingly concerned, I called the main Brenner and Associates number. After hours answering service, picked up immediately. "Good evening, Brenner and Associates. This is Patricia with answering service. How may I help you?" "Hi, this is Flora Harrington, Danny Harrington's wife. I'm trying to reach my husband. He said he was working late with a client tonight, but I don't see his car in the parking lot. Is there another location where client meetings might be held?" Brief pause before Patricia responded. "Mrs. Harrington, I show that Mr. Harrington signed out of office at 3:30 this afternoon. He left message saying he'd be at off-site client meetings for remainder of day. He didn't specify location, but mentioned he'd be unreachable until tomorrow morning." My heart began beating faster as I processed this information. Danny had told me his client emergency arose at 4 p.m., but according to answering service, he'd left office 30 minutes before that call. Either service was mistaken, or Danny had lied to me about where he was and what he was doing. I drove home in mounting anxiety, mind racing through possible explanations. Perhaps Danny had gone to client's home or office for meeting. Maybe he'd stopped somewhere for dinner before heading to restaurant meeting. There could be dozens of innocent reasons why his schedule didn't match what he'd told me. But when I pulled into our driveway at 9:15 p.m., Danny's car still wasn't there. Our house felt emptier than usual, and I found myself wandering from room to room, unable to concentrate on normal evening activities. Sebastian was upstairs, presumably still working on scholarship applications, unaware his mother was experiencing her first real marital panic moment. I tried Danny's phone several more times over the next hour, but each call went directly to voicemail. I sent text messages asking him to call me, explaining I'd gone to his office with dinner, and was concerned about his whereabouts. Messages showed as delivered, but went unanswered. By 11 p.m., I was genuinely frightened. In 22 marriage years, Danny had never been unreachable this long without explanation. Even during busiest periods, he'd respond to urgent messages within an hour or two. Complete silence was unprecedented and alarming. I was sitting in our living room, staring at my phone and debating whether to call hospitals or police stations, when I heard Danny's BMW pull into our driveway. Relief flooded through me as I heard his key in front door, followed immediately by confusion about where he'd been and why he hadn't responded to my calls. Danny entered house with quiet movements of someone trying not to wake sleeping family members. He seemed surprised finding me waiting in living room, and his expression shifted through several emotions: guilt, annoyance, what looked like calculation, before settling on concerned husband persona I'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Flora, honey, what are you doing up so late? Is everything okay? I was worried about you," I said, studying his face for clues about his evening. "I tried bringing you dinner at office, but you weren't there. Answering service said you left at 3:30, but you called me at 4, saying you were just starting emergency client meeting." Danny's pause lasted only seconds, but long enough for me to notice. When he responded, his voice carried familiar tone of patient explanation. I now realize was his standard response to questions requiring creative answers. The explanation was detailed and plausible, exactly the kind of client emergency requiring immediate attention, and easily running longer than expected. But something about Danny's delivery felt rehearsed, as if he'd prepared this story during his drive home, rather than lived through experiences he was describing. As Danny headed upstairs to shower and change clothes, I remained in living room, holding my phone and reviewing our conversation. Every word he'd said was reasonable and believable, but for the first time in our marriage, I found myself questioning whether my husband was telling me the truth. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I checked Danny's story. I called the Andersons' house, ostensibly to follow up on their meeting, and ensure they were feeling better about their investment concerns. "Mrs. Anderson," I said when she answered, "this is Flora Harrington, Danny's wife. I just wanted to check on how you and your husband are feeling after your meeting yesterday evening." Danny mentioned Mr. Anderson wasn't feeling well. Long pause before Mrs. Anderson responded, and when she did, her voice carried clear confusion. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington, but I think there might be some mistake. We haven't met with Danny recently. In fact, we haven't scheduled any appointments with him since our quarterly review in January." The words hit me like physical blow. Danny had lied to me, not just about his whereabouts, but about his entire evening. He'd created elaborate story involving specific clients, and detailed circumstances that were completely fabricated. As I hung up the phone, I realized my marriage had just entered uncharted territory. For the first time since our wedding day, I began wondering who Danny Harrington really was, and what else he might be hiding from me. The 3 days following my discovery of Danny's Anderson meeting lie were the longest of my marriage. I went through normal family life motions, preparing meals, doing laundry, helping Sebastian with final college preparations, while my mind raced through possible explanations for my husband's deception. Each innocent scenario I constructed felt increasingly implausible, leaving me to confront possibilities I'd never imagined. Was Danny having an affair? The thought made me physically nauseated, but I couldn't dismiss it. Secretive phone calls, improved appearance, emotional distance, they formed a pattern pointing toward infidelity. But even if Danny was cheating, why create such elaborate lie about client meetings? Why not simply say he was working late at office, or attending business dinner? Was he involved in something illegal? Danny's access to client funds and investment accounts could provide opportunities for financial crimes, but the man I knew was scrupulously honest about money. He returned extra change to cashiers, declared every income penny on tax returns, never even cheated on golf scorecards. The idea of Danny embezzling seemed as foreign as imagining him robbing banks. Was he planning to leave our marriage? This possibility terrified me more than others, because it felt both devastating and somehow inevitable. Danny's withdrawal from our family, reduced involvement with Sebastian, inability to show enthusiasm for our son's achievements, they could all be signs of man preparing to exit his current life. By Friday evening, I decided that living in uncertainty was worse than knowing truth, regardless of how painful it might be. Sebastian was spending weekend at friend Kevin's house, working on group project for AP Physics class, which meant Danny and I would be alone together for first time in weeks. I planned my approach carefully. I'd wait until after dinner, when Danny was relaxed and presumably more likely to be honest with me. I'd start with gentle questions about his work stress and feelings about our marriage, giving him opportunities to volunteer information before confronting him directly about Anderson lie. But Danny didn't come home for dinner that Friday. At 6 p.m., he called to explain he'd been invited to an important networking event that could lead to significant new business for firm. It's cocktail party for high net worth individuals, he said, voice carrying familiar tone of professional obligation. I hate to miss dinner with you, but this could be career-changing opportunity. I listened to his explanation while staring at our dining room table, which I'd set for two with our good china and wine Danny had given me for our anniversary. Once again, I was alone in our house, waiting for husband who was somewhere else, doing something that didn't include me. After hanging up, I sat in our quiet kitchen and made decision that would change our marriage trajectory and my life. Instead of spending another evening wondering and worrying, I was going to find out where Danny really was and what he was actually doing. I had never followed my husband or spied on him during our 22 years together. The idea felt simultaneously necessary and deeply wrong, like violating sacred trust even though that trust had apparently already been broken. But I couldn't continue living in suspended disbelief, accepting explanations that made less sense with each passing day. Danny had left house at 5:30, claiming he needed stopping at office before heading to networking event. I gave him 30 minutes to reach destination, then drove downtown to see if his car was at Brenner and Associates. Office parking lot was empty except for security guard's vehicle, confirming Danny wasn't working late as implied. For next 2 hours, I drove aimlessly around Millbrook Heights and surrounding towns, looking for Danny's distinctive BMW without clear plan for what I'd do if I found it. The whole exercise felt surreal and slightly pathetic, middle-aged woman stalking her own husband because she couldn't trust his word anymore. At 9 p.m., I finally spotted Danny's car in Seasons restaurant parking lot, upscale establishment about 20 minutes from our home. Through large windows, I could see restaurant's interior, warm lighting, intimate table settings, well-dressed couples enjoying romantic dinners. This wasn't networking event or business meeting. This was a date. I parked across street and sat in my car, hands shaking as I processed what I was seeing. After a few minutes, I watched Danny emerge from restaurant with woman I didn't recognize. She was younger than me, blonde, attractive, clearly comfortable with Danny in ways suggesting familiarity and intimacy. They stood close together outside restaurant entrance, talking and laughing, before sharing kiss that left no doubt about their relationship's nature. The woman got into silver sedan, while Danny walked to his BMW. I followed silver car at distance, heart pounding as I realized I was about to learn where my husband's girlfriend lived. Car led me to Garden View Apartments, modest complex in Riverside, where woman parked and walked to ground floor unit. Through windows, I could see 2 small children running to greet her at door. I sat in parking lot for another hour, watching apartment and trying to process what I'd discovered. Danny wasn't just having affair, he was involved with single mother, someone who had children depending on her relationship with him. This wasn't casual fling or midlife crisis mistake. This was complete alternative life Danny had been building while maintaining our marriage facade. The drive home took 45 minutes, during which I rehearsed dozens of possible confrontations with Danny. I would demand truth about everything. I would give him ultimatum, end affair immediately, or face divorce proceedings. I would insist on marriage counseling to see if we could salvage our relationship. But when I arrived at our house at 11:30 p.m., Danny was already home and in bed. Next morning, he greeted me with usual weekend cheerfulness, asking about my day plans and suggesting we take Sebastian out for lunch when he returned from Kevin's house. He showed no signs of guilt or remorse, no indication he'd spent previous evening with another woman and her children. That afternoon, while Danny was playing golf with his usual foursome and Sebastian was still at Kevin's house, I made phone call that would transform me from betrayed wife into strategic investigator. I contacted Linda Abrams, private investigator whose name I'd found through online search for professionals specializing in matrimonial investigations. Linda's office was in nondescript building 30 miles from Millbrook Heights, far enough from our social circle that I was unlikely to encounter anyone I knew. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and direct manner that immediately put me at ease despite circumstances that brought me to her office. "Mrs. Harrington," Linda said after I'd explained my situation, "what exactly do you want to accomplish with this investigation? Are you looking for evidence to confront your husband? Are you planning to file for divorce? Are you hoping to save your marriage?" "I want to know the truth," I replied. "All of it. I want to understand what my husband has been doing, who he's been seeing, and how long this has been going on. I want to know if our entire marriage has been a lie, or if this is something recent that we might be able to work through." Linda nodded understandingly. "I have to ask some difficult questions. Are you prepared for the possibility that what we discover might be worse than what you already suspect? Are you emotionally ready to learn details that could make reconciliation impossible?" I thought about Sebastian, about our beautiful home, about the 22 years I had invested in building a life with Danny. I thought about the alternative, continuing to live in ignorance while my husband maintained his double life. "I'm ready," I said. "I need to know what I'm dealing with before I can decide how to handle it." Linda explained her process, her fees, and the types of evidence she would be able to gather. She would conduct surveillance, investigate financial records, document Danny's activities, and provide me with a comprehensive report about his behavior and relationships. The investigation would take approximately 6 weeks to complete thoroughly. "One more question, Mrs. Harrington. If we discover evidence of infidelity or other betrayals, what are you planning to do with that information?" I hadn't fully considered this question, but the answer came to me immediately. "I'm going to use it to protect myself and my son. Whatever Danny has been hiding, whatever he's been planning, I want to be prepared when he finally decides to stop pretending our marriage exists." As I drove home from Linda's office, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with anticipation. For the first time in months, I was taking action instead of simply reacting to Danny's behavior. I was going to learn the truth about my marriage, and then I was going to decide what to do with that knowledge. I had no idea that the truth would be far more complex and devastating than anything I had imagined, or that Danny's betrayal would extend far beyond a simple affair into criminal territory that would destroy multiple lives and families. The 6 weeks that followed my first meeting with Linda Abrams were simultaneously the most enlightening and most devastating period of my adult life. Every few days, Linda would send me updates through encrypted email, photographs, documents, surveillance reports that painted an increasingly complex picture of Danny's secret activities. Each revelation was worse than the last, building toward a conclusion that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Linda's first breakthrough came within the initial week of surveillance. The woman I had seen Danny with at Seasons Restaurant was named Amy Goldfine, a 34-year-old dental hygienist who lived in the Garden View apartments with her 2 children, Tony and Tammy. But Amy wasn't Danny's only romantic interest, she was just the most serious one. Through careful observation and public records research, Linda discovered that Danny was simultaneously maintaining relationships with at least 3 different women, each of whom believed she was his primary romantic partner. The sophistication of Danny's scheduling, and the compartmentalization required to maintain these relationships was staggering. Amy Goldfine received Danny's attention on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, plus most Saturday afternoons. During these visits, Danny played the role of devoted boyfriend and stepfather, attending Tony's Little League games, helping Tammy with her kindergarten homework, and taking the family on outings to parks, movies, and restaurants. Amy's neighbors knew Danny as Amy's boyfriend who's getting divorced, and several had commented to Linda during casual conversations about what a wonderful father figure he was to the children. Linda Brenner, the 38-year-old real estate agent, saw Danny on Monday and Wednesday evenings. Their relationship appeared more sophisticated and adult-focused, involving expensive dinners, cultural events, and weekend trips to Boston and New York, that Danny had hidden from me by claiming they were business conferences. Linda Brenner had introduced Danny to her social circle as her serious boyfriend, and they had been discussing marriage and combining their households. Tammy Abrams, the 29-year-old elementary school teacher, received Danny's attention on Friday evenings and Sunday afternoons. Their relationship was the most romantic and future-oriented, involving elaborate surprise dates, expensive gifts, and detailed planning for a wedding that was scheduled for the following spring. Danny had proposed to Tammy with a 2-carat diamond ring and had been actively house hunting with her for their future home. The logistical complexity of managing these relationships while maintaining his marriage to me required military-level precision. Danny had developed different personas for each relationship, adjusting his interests, opinions, and even his speaking patterns to match what each woman found attractive. With Amy, he was the devoted family man who loved children and wanted to provide stability. With Linda, he was the successful businessman ready for a sophisticated partnership. With Tammy, he was the romantic who believed in soulmates and fairy tale endings. But the romantic deceptions were only the beginning of what Linda's investigation uncovered. The financial web supporting Danny's multiple relationships was far more complex and criminal than I had imagined possible. Through public records searches and financial industry contacts, Linda discovered that Danny had been systematically embezzling money from his clients at Brenner and Associates for over 18 months. The scheme was sophisticated and carefully designed to avoid detection during routine audits or casual account reviews. Danny targeted elderly clients and recent widows, people who trusted him completely and rarely questioned their account statements in detail. He would transfer small amounts from multiple accounts, usually less than $5,000 per transaction, into a series of shell accounts he had established using fake business names. The stolen money would then be transferred through several intermediary accounts before ultimately funding his various households and relationships. The total amount of stolen funds was staggering. Over $800,000 had been diverted from client accounts over the past year and a half. This money had paid for Amy's apartment, her children's private school tuition, and all their living expenses. It had funded Linda Brenner's son's college costs and the down payment on her new condominium. It had covered Tammy's credit card bills, her car payments, and the engagement ring Danny had given her. But the embezzlement extended beyond romantic relationships. Danny had been using client funds to maintain our own lifestyle as well, supplementing his legitimate income to pay for Sebastian's college preparations, our mortgage, and the various improvements we had made to our home over the past 2 years. The financial success I had attributed to Danny's skill as an investment advisor was actually built on stolen money from vulnerable clients who trusted him with their life savings. Linda's investigation revealed the names and details of Danny's victims. Margaret Hensley, an 82-year-old widow who had entrusted Danny with her late husband's life insurance money, and was now unwittingly funding Amy's children's education. Robert Chen, a 75-year-old retiree whose pension fund had been gradually depleted to pay for Danny's romantic weekends with Linda Brenner. Sarah Williams, a recent widow whose husband's 401k was being systematically drained to finance Danny's engagement to Tammy. The emotional manipulation required to maintain this scheme was as sophisticated as the financial mechanics. Danny had cultivated deep personal relationships with his elderly clients, positioning himself as a trusted family advisor who genuinely cared about their well-being. He attended their family gatherings, remembered their grandchildren's names, and provided emotional support during difficult periods. This trust made them less likely to scrutinize their account statements and more likely to accept Danny's explanations for any questions they might have. Linda documented Danny's methods through surveillance and financial records. She observed him visiting clients in their homes, bringing flowers and small gifts, spending hours listening to their concerns and providing reassurance about their financial security. The cruel irony was that Danny's victims genuinely loved and trusted him, even as he was systematically stealing their money to fund his personal relationships. The investigation also revealed the timeline of Danny's crimes. The embezzlement had begun shortly after Sebastian started his senior year of high school, coinciding with the period when Danny's behavior had first started changing. The initial thefts were small and infrequent, but as Danny's financial obligations increased with his expanding romantic relationships, the frequency and amounts of the stolen funds had escalated dramatically. Most disturbing was the evidence that Danny was planning to accelerate his timeline for leaving our marriage. Linda discovered that Danny had been consulting with divorce attorneys, exploring ways to minimize his financial obligations to me and Sebastian while protecting the assets he had moved into hidden accounts. He had been preparing for a scenario where he would abandon our family, marry one of his girlfriends, and disappear with enough stolen money to start a new life. Linda's surveillance revealed that Danny's girlfriends were beginning to pressure him for more commitment and clarity about his future plans. Amy had been asking when he was going to finalize his divorce and move in with her family. Linda Brenner was becoming suspicious about why Danny's divorce was taking so long to complete. Tammy was planning their wedding and becoming frustrated with Danny's vague explanations about timing and logistics. The pressure from multiple fronts was forcing Danny toward a decision point. He couldn't maintain his current situation indefinitely without someone discovering his deceptions or demanding proof of his promises. Linda's assessment was that Danny was planning to make his move soon, probably within the next few months. The most chilling discovery came in Linda's final week of investigation. Through careful surveillance and some strategic inquiries, she learned that Danny had been telling each of his girlfriends that he was planning to reveal his divorce plans publicly at a significant family event. He had mentioned Sebastian's graduation as the perfect opportunity to make a clean break from his old life and start fresh with his new chosen family. Amy believed she would be Danny's choice because of their established family dynamic with her children. Linda Brenner thought her sophisticated lifestyle and professional success made her the obvious selection. Tammy was confident that their engagement and wedding plans proved Danny's commitment to their future together. None of them knew about the other's existence, and none of them understood that Danny's promises were financially impossible to keep because his income was built on criminal activity that would inevitably be discovered and prosecuted. As I read through Linda's comprehensive final report, I realized that Danny wasn't just planning to abandon our marriage, he was orchestrating the destruction of multiple families and the financial ruin of innocent clients who had trusted him with their life savings. His betrayal extended far beyond infidelity into criminal territory that would destroy lives and land him in federal prison. The question was no longer whether I should confront Danny about his affair, but how I should handle my knowledge of crimes that were devastating innocent people while funding the elaborate deception that had become our marriage. I had the power to stop Danny's criminal activity and protect his victims, but using that power would destroy not just our marriage but Sebastian's relationship with his father and our entire family's future. Linda's investigation had given me everything I needed to understand the full scope of Danny's betrayal. Now I had to decide what to do with that devastating knowledge. Just when I thought Linda's investigation had revealed the full extent of Danny's deception, she uncovered a layer of betrayal so profound that it changed my understanding of our entire marriage history. What I had initially believed was an 18-month affair had actually been a decades-long pattern of manipulation and fraud that predated Sebastian's birth. The breakthrough came when Linda decided to investigate Danny's financial history more thoroughly, looking for patterns that might explain how he had developed such sophisticated methods of embezzlement. What she discovered was that Danny's criminal behavior wasn't a recent development triggered by midlife crisis or financial pressure. It was his standard operating procedure that he had been refining and perfecting throughout our entire marriage. Linda's forensic accountant contact was able to trace irregularities in Danny's financial activities back over 15 years. The embezzlement from Brenner and Associates wasn't Danny's first foray into stealing client funds, it was simply his most recent and largest-scale operation. During his early years at the firm, Danny had tested smaller schemes, stealing modest amounts from accounts and observing how long it took for discrepancies to be noticed, if they were noticed at all. The pattern was always the same. Danny would target vulnerable clients who trusted him completely, usually elderly individuals, or people going through major life transitions who were less likely to scrutinize their account statements carefully. He would start with small amounts, sometimes as little as a few $100s, and gradually increase the thefts as he became more confident in his methods. But the financial crimes were only part of a larger pattern of deception that had defined Danny's character throughout our marriage. Linda's investigation revealed that Danny had been maintaining extramarital relationships almost continuously since our wedding day. The names changed, the circumstances varied, but there had always been other women who believed they were building futures with my husband. During Sebastian's early childhood, when I had been focused on being a new mother, and had attributed Danny's occasional absences to normal work pressures, he had been involved with Maria Santos, a single mother who worked as a nurse at Hartford Hospital. Danny had promised to leave me once Sebastian was old enough to understand, and had been supporting Maria and her daughter for over 3 years before eventually abandoning them when Sebastian started school. When Sebastian was in elementary school, Danny had maintained a relationship with Jennifer Walsh, a divorced teacher who thought Danny was separated from his wife and living in a temporary apartment while finalizing custody arrangements. Danny had attended parent-teacher conferences for Jennifer's son, helped with homework, and played the role of devoted stepfather for 2 years before ending the relationship when Jennifer began pressuring him for a firmer commitment timeline. The list continued through Sebastian's middle school years and into high school, with Danny cycling through relationships every 2 to 3 years, always promising women that he was on the verge of leaving his marriage, always providing financial support that kept them invested in the relationship, always disappearing when the pressure for real commitment became too intense. What made these revelations particularly devastating was the realization that Danny's pattern of behavior had directly impacted our family in ways I had never understood. The periods when Danny had seemed distant or distracted, which I had attributed to work stress or normal marital challenges, had actually been times when he was emotionally invested in other relationships. The financial decisions that had shaped our lifestyle, the timing of major purchases, vacation plans, even the neighborhood we lived in, had been influenced by Danny's need to manage multiple households and romantic obligations. Linda's investigation revealed that our own financial security had been built on stolen money from the very beginning of Danny's criminal career. The down payment on our house had come partially from funds Danny had embezzled from his first employer. Sebastian's private kindergarten tuition had been paid with money stolen from client accounts. Even the college fund we had been so proud of building for Sebastian contained thousands of dollars that Danny had diverted from elderly clients' retirement accounts. The scope of victims was staggering. Over the 15 years of Danny's criminal activity, Linda identified at least 47 different clients whose accounts had been compromised. Some had lost relatively small amounts that could be disguised as market fluctuations or fee adjustments. Others had been systematically drained of substantial portions of their life savings, leaving them in financial distress that they attributed to poor investment performance rather than theft. Eleanor Westbrook, an 87-year-old widow, had trusted Danny with her deceased husband's pension funds and life insurance money. Over a 5-year period, Danny had stolen nearly $200,000 from her accounts, leaving her unable to afford the assisted living facility she had planned for and forcing her to move in with relatives who resented the financial burden. Thomas Martinez, a 73-year-old retiree, had given Danny control over his 401k rollovers from a 40-year career in manufacturing. Danny had systematically transferred portions of these funds to support his relationship with Jennifer Walsh, ultimately stealing over $150,000 that Thomas had planned to use for medical expenses and long-term care. The emotional manipulation required to maintain these crimes was as sophisticated as the financial schemes. Danny had cultivated genuine relationships with his victims, remembering their family details, celebrating their grandchildren's achievements, and providing emotional support during difficult periods. This personal connection made the crimes more effective because clients trusted Danny completely and rarely questioned his recommendations or account explanations. Linda documented numerous instances of Danny attending clients' family events, bringing gifts for grandchildren, and even speaking at anniversary celebrations and funeral services. He had become integrated into their lives as a trusted family advisor, making his theft not just a financial crime but a profound betrayal of personal relationships. The investigation also revealed that Danny's criminal activities had escalated in response to the increasing demands of his romantic relationships. Each new girlfriend represented additional financial obligations: rent, utilities, children's expenses, gifts, entertainment costs. As Danny's personal expenses increased, he needed to steal larger amounts more frequently to maintain his various households. The progression was clear: Danny would meet a new woman, begin providing modest financial support to establish the relationship, gradually increase his contributions as the relationship deepened, and then begin planning his exit strategy when the financial or emotional demands became unsustainable. The embezzlement would spike during the height of each relationship and then stabilize at a lower level as Danny prepared to transition to his next target. What made Danny's current situation particularly dangerous was that he had reached a point where his financial obligations exceeded his ability to steal without detection. Amy's children needed increasing support as they grew older. Linda Brenner's expectations for their shared lifestyle were expensive. Tammy's wedding plans required substantial immediate funding. The pressure from multiple fronts was forcing Danny to take increasingly larger and more frequent amounts from client accounts. Linda's forensic analysis showed that Danny's embezzlement had accelerated dramatically over the past 6 months, reaching levels that were mathematically unsustainable. Client statements were becoming harder to falsify, account discrepancies were more difficult to explain, and several clients had begun asking detailed questions about their investment performance. The most chilling discovery was that Danny had been researching ways to disappear completely if his criminal activities were discovered. Linda found evidence that he had been exploring options for creating new identities, moving money to offshore accounts, and establishing residences in countries without extradition treaties with the United States. Danny wasn't just planning to leave our marriage, he was preparing to abandon his criminal activity and flee the country if necessary, leaving behind not only his family but also his victims who would never recover their stolen money, and his girlfriends who would discover that their entire relationships had been built on lies and criminal proceeds. The psychological profile that emerged from Linda's investigation was of a man with no genuine emotional attachments to anyone, including Sebastian and me. Danny's relationships were all transactional, designed to serve his needs for financial gain, sexual gratification, or social status. His ability to compartmentalize these relationships and maintain appropriate emotional responses in each situation suggested a level of psychological detachment that bordered on sociopathic. Linda's final assessment was that Danny was planning to make his exit from our marriage very soon, probably at Sebastian's graduation as he had suggested to his girlfriends. The public nature of such an announcement would serve multiple purposes. It would humiliate me sufficiently to discourage any attempts at reconciliation, it would demonstrate his commitment to whichever girlfriend he chose to keep, and it would create enough chaos and emotional drama to distract from any immediate scrutiny of his financial activities. As I absorbed the full scope of Danny's betrayal, I realized that our entire marriage had been a performance designed to provide him with cover for criminal activity and multiple romantic relationships. Sebastian and I weren't his family, we were his primary disguise, the respectable facade that made his other activities possible. The man I had loved and trusted for over 2 decades was not just unfaithful, but was a career criminal whose activities had devastated innocent people and would ultimately destroy our son's relationship with his father. The question was no longer how to save our marriage, but how to protect Sebastian and Danny's victims from the devastation that was coming when his criminal empire finally collapsed. The knowledge of Danny's crimes created an impossible moral dilemma that consumed my thoughts and tortured my conscience for weeks. I possessed evidence that could stop ongoing theft from vulnerable elderly clients, but using that evidence would destroy Sebastian's relationship with his father and expose our family to public humiliation that would follow us for years. Every morning I woke up carrying the weight of 47 victims' financial devastation while watching Danny kiss Sebastian goodbye and drive off to steal more money from trusting clients. I sat at our breakfast table, pouring orange juice and packing lunches, knowing that the man discussing Sebastian's college plans was simultaneously planning to abandon his family and flee the country with stolen funds. The ethical implications were staggering. By remaining silent, I was complicit in Danny's ongoing crimes. Every day I delayed confrontation or reporting meant more money stolen from people who could least afford the loss. Eleanor Westbrook was already struggling to pay for basic medical care because of Danny's theft. Thomas Martinez had postponed necessary surgery because he believed his investments had performed poorly. But reporting Danny immediately would trigger a chain of events that would devastate Sebastian just weeks before his graduation and Harvard enrollment. My 18-year-old son, who had never caused us a moment of trouble and had worked incredibly hard to earn his academic achievements, would discover that his father was a criminal and his entire family life had been built on lies and stolen money. The timing felt impossibly cruel. Sebastian was supposed to be celebrating his acceptance to Harvard, enjoying his final weeks of high school, and looking forward to his future with confidence and excitement. Instead, he would be dealing with his father's arrest, his family's financial ruin, and the social stigma of being associated with such spectacular criminal behavior. I spent sleepless nights weighing my options and their consequences. If I confronted Danny privately, he might flee immediately, taking whatever money he could access and leaving his victims with no hope of recovery. If I reported him to authorities without warning, Sebastian would learn about his father's crimes from news reports or police officers rather than from me. If I waited until after graduation, more clients would be victimized, and Danny might successfully execute his escape plan. If I acted immediately, Sebastian's graduation would be overshadowed by his father's arrest and our family's public disgrace. The emotional complexity was equally torturous. Despite everything I had learned about Danny's crimes and deceptions, I was still processing the end of a 22-year marriage to someone I had genuinely loved. The man who had held my hand during my mother's funeral, who had cried when Sebastian was born, who had seemed to share my values and dreams, had that person ever existed, or had it all been performance? I found myself grieving not just the loss of my marriage, but the discovery that my entire adult life had been built on fiction. The memories I treasured, family vacations, holiday celebrations, quiet moments of supposed intimacy, were all contaminated by the knowledge that Danny had been living multiple lives throughout our entire relationship. The psychological impact on Sebastian weighed heavily on my decision-making process. How do you explain to an 18-year-old that his father is a career criminal who has been stealing from elderly clients to fund affairs with multiple women? How do you help a young man process the information that his college fund contains stolen money, and his family's comfortable lifestyle has been built on victimizing vulnerable people? Sebastian idolized his father despite Danny's increasing emotional absence over the past 2 years. He spoke proudly about following in Danny's footsteps in the business world, about the lessons Danny had taught him about integrity and hard work. Discovering the truth about Danny's character would shatter Sebastian's worldview and force him to question everything he believed about family, honesty, and success. I consulted with a therapist who specialized in family trauma, speaking in hypothetical terms about how to help a teenager cope with discovering a parent's criminal behavior. The advice was sobering. Such revelations typically triggered identity crises, trust issues, and long-term psychological challenges that required extensive professional support. The financial implications were equally daunting. If Danny was arrested and convicted, our family assets would likely be frozen and possibly forfeited as proceeds of criminal activity. The house Sebastian had grown up in, the college fund we had accumulated, the cars we drove, everything could be seized to provide restitution to Danny's victims. Sebastian might lose his ability to attend Harvard, not because of academic failure, but because his family's finances had been built on criminal activity. The injustice of punishing an innocent young man for his father's crimes felt overwhelming, but the legal system wouldn't distinguish between Sebastian's innocence and his family's criminal gains. I also struggled with my own culpability and judgment. How had I lived with Danny for over 2 decades without recognizing his true character? What did my failure to detect his deception say about my intelligence, intuition, or worthiness as a partner? Was I partially responsible for his victim's suffering, because I had provided him with the respectable family image that made his crimes possible. The social consequences would extend far beyond our immediate family. Sebastian's friends would know his father was a criminal. Our neighbors would gossip about our family's dramatic fall from grace. The parents of Sebastian's classmates would wonder whether we had known about Danny's crimes and chosen to remain silent. As graduation day approached, I realized that Danny was planning to force my hand by making his announcement public. His plan to abandon our family at Sebastian's graduation would create the very chaos and humiliation I was trying to avoid, through careful timing and planning. If Danny was going to destroy our family publicly, I needed to be prepared with my own response. The question was no longer whether to expose his crimes, but how to do so in a way that protected Sebastian, while ensuring that Danny's victims received justice and his ongoing criminal activity was stopped. The internal struggle between protecting my son and protecting Danny's victims was resolved by a simple realization: Sebastian would be better served by learning the truth from me, presented with context and support, than by discovering it through his father's public betrayal and subsequent arrest. I decided to let Danny make his move at graduation, knowing that I would be ready with evidence that would expose not just his abandonment of our family, but his criminal destruction of innocent people's financial security. If he wanted a public stage for his announcement, I would give him one he would never forget. With graduation day just 1 week away, I transformed from grieving wife into strategic operative, carefully orchestrating every element of my response to Danny's planned betrayal. The manila envelope that would change our lives forever sat in my desk drawer, containing 18 months of investigation, documentation, and evidence that would expose not just Danny's infidelity, but his systematic criminal destruction of innocent lives. Linda Abrams had provided me with everything I needed: bank records showing fraudulent transfers, photographs documenting Danny's relationships with multiple women, financial statements proving the embezzlement of over $800,000 from client accounts, and detailed timelines of his criminal activities, spanning 15 years. But raw evidence wasn't enough. I needed to present this information in a way that would be immediately comprehensible to an audience of 500 shocked graduation attendees. Working with Linda's recommendations, I organized the evidence into 3 distinct sections. The first folder contained photographs and documentation of Danny's 3 simultaneous relationships, with clear images showing him with Amy Goldfine and her children, Linda Brenner at expensive restaurants, and Tammy Abrams during romantic getaways. Each woman's story was summarized on a single page, explaining how Danny had promised to leave his wife and build a future with her specifically. The second folder documented the financial crimes in terms that any parent in that gymnasium would immediately understand. Instead of complex financial jargon, I had Linda's forensic accountant prepare simple charts showing how much money Danny had stolen from each victim and what that money had been used to purchase. Eleanor Westbrook's $200,000 had paid for Amy's apartment and her children's private school tuition. Thomas Martinez's $150,000 had funded Danny's romantic weekends with Linda Brenner. The third folder contained the most damning evidence, proof that Danny had been planning to flee the country with stolen money, abandoning not just his family, but all the women he had been promising to marry. Linda had discovered research Danny had conducted into offshore banking, new identity documents, and countries without extradition treaties. This wasn't a man overcome by passion, this was a calculating criminal preparing his escape route. But presenting evidence wasn't enough. I needed to ensure that the appropriate authorities were prepared to act immediately. Through Linda's contacts, I had already provided copies of all documentation to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the Connecticut State Police, and the State Attorney General's office. Federal agents were standing by, waiting for my signal to arrest Danny for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. I had also contacted each of Danny's victims personally, explaining that I had discovered evidence of financial crimes affecting their accounts and that they would be contacted by federal investigators within 48 hours of graduation day. Most were initially skeptical. Danny had cultivated such strong personal relationships that many clients couldn't believe he would steal from them. But when I provided specific details about their account discrepancies, the reality became undeniable. The emotional preparation was equally important. I had arranged for Sebastian to meet with a trauma counselor the day after graduation, regardless of how events unfolded. Patricia Reeves specialized in helping young adults process parental betrayal and family dissolution, and she had already developed a preliminary treatment plan based on my description of our circumstances. I had also prepared Sebastian as much as possible without revealing the full truth. During casual conversations over the past month, I had gradually introduced the idea that his father had been under increasing stress and might be dealing with personal problems that could affect our family. I hadn't mentioned crimes or affairs, but I had planted seeds that would make the eventual revelations less shocking. My own support system was carefully arranged. My sister Rachel had flown in from California, ostensibly to attend Sebastian's graduation, but actually to provide emotional support and practical assistance in the aftermath of Danny's arrest. She knew the full truth about Danny's crimes and was prepared to help Sebastian and me navigate the legal and financial chaos that would follow. The legal aspects were complex but manageable. I had retained Margaret Thompson, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in representing family members of white-collar criminals. While I wasn't accused of any crimes, Margaret would help protect our family's remaining assets and ensure that Sebastian's college fund, the portions that weren't derived from stolen money, would be preserved for his education. I had also consulted with Robert Chen, a civil litigation attorney, who would help Danny's victims recover their stolen funds through asset forfeiture and restitution proceedings. Robert had assured me that cooperating with federal investigators and providing evidence would demonstrate my commitment to making victims whole, which would help protect our family from civil liability. The financial preparations were equally thorough. I had opened new bank accounts in my name only, transferred legitimate funds that predated Danny's criminal activity, and secured employment as a substitute teacher to provide immediate income after Danny's arrest. The house would likely be seized as proceeds of criminal activity, so I had already identified apartments where Sebastian and I could relocate. Most importantly, I had prepared for the immediate aftermath of the confrontation. Federal agents would be positioned in the gymnasium parking lot, ready to arrest Danny as soon as he attempted to leave the building. Amy Goldfein, Linda Brenner, and Tammy Abrams would all be contacted simultaneously, preventing any of them from warning Danny about the investigation. The media strategy was carefully planned. I had contacted investigative reporters from 3 major news outlets, providing them with embargoed information about Danny's crimes that would be released immediately after his arrest. By controlling the narrative from the beginning, I could ensure that the focus remained on Danny's victimization of elderly clients, rather than just the salacious details of his multiple affairs. Sebastian's protection was my highest priority throughout all planning. I had arranged for him to leave the gymnasium immediately after my revelation, accompanied by my sister Rachel, so he wouldn't have to witness his father's arrest or deal with the media chaos that would follow. Dr. Reeves would be available by phone that evening to provide immediate crisis counseling if needed. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using Danny's own methods against him: careful planning, attention to detail, and strategic timing to achieve maximum impact. But unlike Danny's schemes, my plan was designed to protect innocent people and ensure that justice was served, not to enable further victimization and criminal activity. As I sealed the manila envelope that would destroy Danny's criminal empire, I felt a strange sense of peace. For months I had been living with the terrible knowledge of his crimes, while watching him continue to steal from vulnerable clients and deceive multiple women. Finally, I would have the opportunity to stop his criminal activity and protect the people he had been systematically destroying. Danny's plan to humiliate me publicly at our son's graduation would indeed create the dramatic confrontation he was expecting. But instead of watching a broken wife collapse under the weight of public abandonment, 500 people would witness the systematic destruction of a criminal who had spent decades victimizing the innocent while hiding behind the facade of a respectable family man. The setup was complete. All that remained was for Danny to trigger the trap he had unknowingly been walking into for months. The Westfield High School gymnasium was packed beyond capacity that humid Saturday afternoon in June. 500 folding chairs were arranged in perfect rows across the polished basketball court, with additional standing room around the perimeter for overflow crowd. The air hummed with excitement and anticipation as families gathered to celebrate their graduates' achievements, cameras ready to capture once-in-a-lifetime moments. Sebastian looked magnificent in his cap and gown, standing with his fellow graduates near the stage. As valedictorian, he would deliver the student address later in the ceremony, but for now he was simply another 18-year-old on the threshold of adulthood, scanning the crowd for familiar faces and waving at relatives who had traveled from across the country to share this moment. Danny and I sat in the third row, positioned perfectly for photographs and close enough to hear Sebastian's speech clearly. To any observer, we looked like the ideal family: successful father in his best suit, proud mother in her carefully chosen navy dress, brilliant son about to embark on his Harvard education. The image was so convincing that I almost forgot it was about to be shattered forever. The manila envelope sat in my purse, thick with evidence and legal documents that would expose Danny's criminal empire. But I wasn't planning to need it yet. According to Linda's intelligence gathering, Danny was planning to make his announcement during the ceremony itself, probably when Sebastian's name was called to receive his diploma. The public nature of the moment would maximize the humiliation while creating enough chaos to cover his immediate exit from the gymnasium. Principal Martinez stepped to the podium and began the ceremony with traditional remarks about achievement, perseverance, and the bright futures awaiting the graduating class. The crowd settled into respectful attention, phones and cameras positioned to capture their children's moments of triumph. I watched Danny throughout the opening remarks, noting his fidgeting and frequent glances toward the exits. He was checking his phone more frequently than usual, and I noticed him scanning the crowd as if looking for specific people. Amy Goldfine was somewhere in the audience. Linda had confirmed her presence with both children, probably expecting to witness Danny's public declaration of his commitment to their relationship. The ceremony proceeded normally through the first portion of the alphabet. Students walked across the stage to thunderous applause from proud families, each graduate representing years of hard work and sacrifice. The atmosphere was joyful and celebratory, exactly as Sebastian's graduation should have been under normal circumstances. When Principal Martinez reached the H surnames, my heart began racing. "Sebastian Harrington," he announced, and my son stepped forward toward the stage with the confident grace that had always made me proud. This was supposed to be our family's shining moment, the culmination of 18 years of love, support, and dedication to Sebastian's success. Instead, Danny chose this precise moment to destroy everything. As Sebastian walked toward the podium to receive his diploma, Danny suddenly stood up. The movement was abrupt and attention-grabbing, immediately drawing stares from nearby families, who expected him to be cheering for his son. Instead, Danny's expression was cold and determined, like a businessman about to deliver an unpleasant termination notice. "Flora," Danny said, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet section around us, "I can't live this lie anymore." The words hit the gymnasium like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, cameras turned toward our family instead of the stage, and even Sebastian paused in his walk toward Principal Martinez, clearly confused by the disruption. "I'm leaving you for Amy," Danny continued, his voice growing louder and more confident, as he realized he had captured the attention of hundreds of people. "We're taking the kids and starting a real family. This charade has gone on long enough." The collective gasp from the audience was audible. Parents covered their children's ears, phones began recording frantically, and Sebastian stood frozen on the gymnasium floor, his diploma forgotten as he processed his father's public abandonment. But Danny wasn't finished with his announcement. He had clearly planned this moment carefully, intending to deliver maximum humiliation, while establishing his narrative of an unhappy marriage that justified his departure. 22 years I've supported this family," Danny said, gesturing dismissively toward me, as if I were a business obligation he was finally terminating. 22 years of pretending to be happy in a marriage that died years ago. Amy and I love each other, and her children deserve to have their father living with them full-time. The gymnasium erupted into chaos. People were standing up to get better views, phones were recording from every angle, and the whispered conversations created a buzz that made Principal Martinez's attempts to restore order completely ineffective. Sebastian looked devastated, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and growing anger as he realized his father was destroying their family in front of everyone they knew. Some of his classmates were trying to comfort him, but Sebastian seemed unable to move or respond to their support. "I've already filed divorce papers," Danny continued, clearly enjoying the dramatic impact of his announcement. Flora will receive appropriate support, but I'm done pretending that our marriage was anything more than a business arrangement. Amy and I are getting married next month, and I'll finally be able to give her children the stable family they deserve. The cruelty was breathtaking. Danny had chosen the most public possible venue to announce his abandonment, ensuring that Sebastian's graduation would forever be remembered as the day his father humiliated his mother and destroyed their family. The calculated nature of the timing during Sebastian's moment of triumph demonstrated a level of psychological cruelty that revealed Danny's true character more clearly than any investigation could have. I sat in my chair, feeling 500 pairs of eyes focused on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public devastation. Some faces showed sympathy, others displayed the hungry curiosity of people witnessing spectacular personal drama. Danny expected me to cry, beg, or flee the gymnasium in humiliation, giving him the victim narrative he needed to justify his actions. Instead, I smiled. Not a broken, desperate smile, but a confident expression that clearly indicated I had been expecting this moment and was prepared for it. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope, standing up with the calm authority of someone who was about to turn the tables completely. Danny's confident expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty as he realized my response wasn't following his script. The gymnasium fell silent again, sensing that the drama was far from over. "Well, Danny," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone system as I walked toward the podium, "since we're sharing family secrets with 500 people, let me tell them what you've been doing with the money you stole from their grandparents." The transformation in the gymnasium's atmosphere was instantaneous and electric. Danny's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror as he realized that his carefully orchestrated humiliation had just become something entirely different. The audience, which had been murmuring sympathetically about my public abandonment, suddenly leaned forward with predatory attention, sensing that the real drama was just beginning. "Stolen money," someone called out from the crowd, and I could see recognition flickering across several faces. Many of the parents in that gymnasium were Danny's clients, or new people who trusted Brenner and Associates with their retirement savings. I walked to the podium with deliberate calm, each step calculated to build suspense, while giving Danny time to fully comprehend that his trap had become mine. Principal Martinez stepped aside, clearly overwhelmed by the unprecedented disruption, but recognizing that this situation was beyond normal ceremonial protocol. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "My husband just announced that he's abandoning our family for his girlfriend Amy and her children. What he failed to mention is how he's been funding this relationship." Danny was frantically shaking his head, mouthing no repeatedly, but his panic was visible to everyone in the front rows. The man who had seemed so confident moments earlier was now visibly sweating, his face pale and his hands trembling. "For the past 18 months, I continued, opening the manila envelope and pulling out the first set of documents, Danny has been systematically stealing money from his elderly clients at Brenner and Associates to support not one, not two but 3 different women, each of whom believes she's his only girlfriend." The explosion of gasps and shocked exclamations was immediate. Parents who had trusted Danny with their life savings were standing up, demanding explanations. Several people were already reaching for their phones, presumably to call their attorneys or check their account balances. "Amy Goldfine," I said, looking directly at the blonde woman in the 7th row, who had gone completely white, "you might be interested to know that your apartment rent, your children's private school tuition, and your car payments have all been funded by money stolen from Eleanor Westbrook, an 87-year-old widow who trusted Danny with her deceased husband's life insurance money." Amy's face crumpled as she realized not only that Danny was married with a son, but that her entire relationship had been built on criminal proceeds. She grabbed her children and began pushing toward the exit, tears streaming down her face. "Linda Brenner," I continued, spotting the sophisticated brunette near the back of the gymnasium, "those expensive dinners in Boston, and the down payment on your new condominium. That money came from Thomas Martinez, a 73-year-old retiree who has been postponing necessary medical surgery because he believes his investments have been performing poorly. Linda Brenner's mouth was opening and closing like a fish, her composed professional demeanor completely shattered as she processed the information. Several people around her were pointing and whispering, recognizing her from Danny's description. "And Tammy Abrams," I said, watching as a young woman near the exit doors began backing away in horror. "That engagement ring Danny gave you and the wedding you've been planning. All funded by money stolen from Margaret Hensley, an 82-year-old grandmother who can no longer afford her medications because Danny has been systematically draining her account for over 2 years." The gymnasium was in complete chaos now. People were shouting questions, several clients were demanding immediate explanations from Danny, and phones were buzzing as news of the confrontation spread beyond the building. Danny himself looked like he might collapse, the confident manipulator reduced to a cornered criminal with no escape route. "The total amount stolen," I announced, raising my voice above the crowd noise, "is over $800,000, taken from 47 different clients over the past 15 years. The FBI has been investigating these crimes for the past month, and federal agents are waiting in the parking lot to arrest Danny for wire fraud, embezzlement and money laundering." Danny's legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. The man who had seemed so powerful and in control just minutes earlier was now revealed as what he truly was, a pathetic criminal whose elaborate schemes had finally been exposed. "But here's the part that makes this particularly heartbreaking," I continued, holding up additional documents. "Danny didn't just steal money to fund his affairs, he's been using client funds to supplement our own family's lifestyle for years. Sebastian's college fund, our mortgage payments, even the car Danny drives to visit his girlfriends, all partially funded by money stolen from trusting elderly clients." Sebastian, who had been standing frozen near the stage throughout this revelation, suddenly found his voice. "Mom, is this true?" he called out, his face showing a mixture of horror and disbelief. "I'm afraid it is, sweetheart," I replied, my heart breaking for my son, who was learning that his entire family life had been built on criminal activity. "Your father has been living a triple life, stealing from vulnerable people to fund relationships with multiple women while lying to all of us." The crowd was becoming increasingly agitated as the financial implications became clear. Several people were shouting demands for immediate account information, others were calling attorneys, and a few parents were approaching Danny directly, their faces showing the kind of rage that comes from discovering your trust has been systematically violated. "Danny planned to announce his divorce publicly today," I continued, "because he thought humiliating me in front of 500 people would prevent me from fighting the divorce or investigating his finances. What he didn't know is that I've been working with federal investigators for months to document his crimes and protect his victims." I held up copies of bank statements, photographs, and legal documents. "Everything is here. Every stolen dollar, every fake business trip, every lie he told to maintain his criminal enterprise. Danny thought he was ending our marriage today, but what he's actually done is trigger his arrest for federal crimes that will send him to prison for the next decade." Danny finally looked up from his hands, and the expression on his face was pure terror. He had realized that his carefully planned exit strategy had become a public confession that would be recorded and broadcast across social media within hours. "The FBI agents are here because I called them," I announced. "They're waiting for Danny to attempt to leave this building so they can arrest him on federal charges. His bank accounts have been frozen, his passport has been confiscated, and warrants have been issued for his arrest." As if on cue, I could see federal agents entering the gymnasium through the main doors, their badges visible as they began moving through the crowd toward our section. Danny looked around desperately, probably calculating his chances of escaping through an emergency exit, but there was nowhere to run. His criminal empire was collapsing in real time, witnessed by hundreds of people who would ensure that his destruction was complete and public. "Sebastian," I called to my son, "please come here. We need to leave now so the federal agents can do their job." As Sebastian walked toward me, his face showing the beginning stages of shock that would require months of therapy to process, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but at the cost of my son's innocence and our family's future. The federal agents moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, their presence transforming the graduation ceremony into something resembling a crime scene. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, whom I had been working with for the past month, approached the podium while her colleagues positioned themselves to prevent Danny's escape. "Mrs. Harrington," Agent Torres said quietly, "we're ready to proceed with the arrest. Would you like to finish your statement first?" I looked out at the crowd of 500 people, many of whom were Danny's victims or their family members, and realized this might be the only opportunity they would have to understand the full scope of his crimes before the legal proceedings began, and media attention focused on salacious details, rather than the human cost of his actions. "Before the FBI takes Danny into custody," I announced, "I want everyone here to understand exactly what he's stolen and from whom. These aren't faceless victims or abstract financial crimes. These are your neighbors, your relatives, people you see at church and the grocery store." I pulled out a prepared list of Danny's victims, each entry containing details that would make the crimes personal and immediate for the audience. Margaret Hensley, age 82, had her deceased husband's pension fund systematically drained to pay for Danny's romantic getaways with his girlfriends. She now lives on Social Security alone and can't afford her heart medication. "She's here today. Margaret, would you please stand up?" An elderly woman in the 15th row slowly rose, supported by what appeared to be her adult daughter. Her dignified posture and the visible pain in her eyes created a stark contrast to Danny's crumpled figure just feet away. Eleanor Westbrook, age 87, trusted Danny with her life insurance money after her husband died. Danny stole over $200,000 to pay for his girlfriend's apartment and her children's private school tuition. Eleanor had to move in with relatives because she could no longer afford independent living. Another elderly woman stood up, this one visibly angry rather than defeated. "That money was supposed to last me the rest of my life," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the gymnasium. "I trusted him like family, and he robbed me blind while pretending to care about my welfare." The crowd's murmur of sympathy was replaced by growing anger as the personal nature of Danny's crimes became clear. These weren't rich investors who could absorb losses. These were vulnerable elderly people whose financial security had been systematically destroyed by someone they trusted completely. Thomas Martinez, 73 years old, gave Danny control of his retirement accounts from 40 years of factory work. Danny has stolen over $150,000, forcing Thomas to postpone surgery for a heart condition because he believes his investments have failed. A man in his 70s stood up in the middle section, his face red with fury. "My wife died thinking we had failed to plan properly for retirement," he shouted. "She blamed herself for our financial problems, while that criminal was stealing our money to support his girlfriends." The emotional impact was devastating. Danny's crimes weren't just financial, they were personal betrayals that had caused psychological trauma, medical neglect, and family stress for dozens of innocent people. Sarah Chen, age 68, is a recent widow whose husband's 401k has been systematically looted to fund Danny's engagement ring for one of his girlfriends. She's been rationing her prescription medications because she thinks her late husband's investment planning was inadequate. Mrs. Chen, whom I recognized from school events when Sebastian and her grandson Kevin were younger, stood up with tears streaming down her face. "He came to my husband's funeral," she said, her voice breaking. "He held my hand and promised to take care of my finances like I was his own mother. And all the time he was stealing from me." I continued reading names and stories, each one adding to the mounting evidence of Danny's systematic victimization of the elderly and vulnerable. By the time I finished the list, 47 victims or their family members had been identified in the crowd, creating a visual representation of the scope of Danny's criminal enterprise. "The total amount stolen is $893,000, I announced. "Money that was supposed to fund retirements, medical care, grandchildren's educations, and end-of-life security for people who worked their entire lives and trusted the wrong person with their life savings." Danny had not moved or spoken during this recitation of his crimes. He remained slumped in his chair, occasionally glancing toward the exits, but clearly recognizing that escape was impossible. His 3 girlfriends had all fled the gymnasium, leaving him completely alone to face the consequences of his actions. "But the financial crimes are only part of the story," I continued. pulling out a new set of documents. Danny didn't just steal money, he manipulated emotions and destroyed families. Amy Goldfein believed Danny was going to adopt her children and create a stable family. Linda Brenner thought she was planning a sophisticated future with a successful businessman. Tammy Abrams has been planning a wedding that was never going to happen. I held up photographs Linda had taken of Danny with each woman and her children or family members. These relationships weren't casual affairs, they were elaborate emotional manipulations designed to create financial obligations that justified increasingly larger thefts from client accounts. The crowd was now completely focused on the evidence I was presenting, with many people taking photographs and videos to document the crimes for their own legal proceedings. Danny told each woman that he was getting divorced, that his wife was the obstacle to their happiness, and that their financial problems would be solved once he was free to support them openly. None of them knew about the others, and none of them knew their relationships were being funded by stolen money. Agent Torres stepped forward, indicating that the arrest needed to proceed, but I held up one final document. The most chilling part of this investigation, I announced, is that Danny was planning to disappear entirely if his crimes were discovered. He has been researching new identities, offshore banking, and countries without extradition treaties. His plan was to steal as much money as possible, choose one girlfriend to take with him, and abandon everyone else, including Sebastian and me, to deal with the legal and financial consequences. This revelation prompted the loudest reaction yet from the crowd. The idea that Danny would abandon his own son to face the consequences of criminal activity he had no knowledge of sparked outrage that transcended the financial crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Torres announced, stepping to the podium, "I'm Special Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force. Daniel Harrington, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement of client funds. You have the right to remain silent." As the agents moved to arrest Danny, the gymnasium erupted into chaos again. Cameras flashed, people shouted questions, and several of the victims began approaching the area where Danny was being handcuffed, demanding immediate information about recovering their stolen money. Sebastian stood beside me, watching his father being arrested while trying to process the complete destruction of everything he had believed about our family. The young man, who should have been celebrating his graduation and Harvard acceptance, was instead witnessing the end of his childhood and the beginning of a legal nightmare that would define his immediate future. As Agent Torres recited Danny's Miranda rights, I pulled out the remaining documents from my manila envelope, determined to ensure that everyone present understood the full scope of his criminal organization before the legal system took control of the narrative. "Before Danny is taken into custody," I announced, "I want to show you exactly how sophisticated this criminal operation was. This wasn't someone who made a few bad decisions, this was a career criminal who spent 15 years perfecting his methods." I held up a timeline that Linda's forensic accountant had prepared, showing the evolution of Danny's crimes from small-scale theft to the massive embezzlement scheme that had funded his current lifestyle. Danny's first documented theft occurred in 2009, just 3 years after Sebastian was born. He stole $1,200 from a widow's account to pay for a weekend getaway with his first girlfriend, Maria Santos. When that theft went undetected, he realized he could systematically steal from clients without consequences. The crowd pressed closer, horrified fascination replacing their initial shock as they realized the timeline meant Danny had been a criminal throughout most of Sebastian's childhood. By 2015, Danny was stealing over $50,000 per year, supporting multiple relationships while using our family as cover for his criminal activities. Every school event he attended, every family vacation we took, every dinner party where you welcomed him into your homes, he was actively stealing from your neighbors and relatives. I displayed bank records showing the progression of theft amounts, the increasing frequency of fraudulent transfers, and the growing number of victim accounts. The current phase of his operation began in 2022, when Danny started targeting larger accounts and stealing six-figure amounts. Amy Goldfein alone has received over $200,000 in stolen money. Linda Brenner's lifestyle has been funded by nearly $150,000 in client theft. Tammy Abrams received $80,000 for her engagement ring and wedding planning. Agent Torres was growing impatient, but she recognized the value of having victims understand the scope of crimes before media coverage distorted the facts. Danny created fake business entities to move stolen money through multiple accounts before it reached his girlfriends. Sunset Consulting, Harbor Investment Services, Millbrook Financial Solutions, all fictitious companies designed to obscure the trail of stolen funds. I held up corporate documents showing the shell companies Danny had established, each one carefully designed to appear legitimate while serving as a conduit for embezzled money. The FBI has traced these funds through 17 different bank accounts across 4 states. Danny wasn't just stealing, he was operating a sophisticated money laundering operation that required detailed planning and systematic execution. Mrs. Hensley called out from the crowd, "What about our money? Can we get it back?" Agent Torres stepped forward to address this crucial question. The FBI has frozen all accounts associated with Mr. Harrington's criminal activities. We've recovered approximately $400,000 in liquid assets, and we're working to seize additional property and investments. However, full restitution will depend on the ongoing investigation and asset recovery efforts. I pulled out the final set of documents, evidence of Danny's escape planning that demonstrated his complete willingness to abandon everyone, including Sebastian, to avoid prosecution. Danny has been researching countries without extradition treaties, methods for creating new identities, and procedures for transferring money to offshore accounts. He wasn't planning to face justice for his crimes. He was planning to disappear with whatever money he could steal, leaving his victims, his girlfriends, and his own son to deal with the consequences. The evidence of Danny's planned abandonment seemed to affect the crowd more than the financial crimes. Parents looked at Sebastian with sympathy, recognizing that he was as much a victim as anyone else. The passport application, under a false name, the research into Brazilian banking laws, the inquiries about purchasing property in non-extradition countries, all of this was happening while Danny was promising Amy he would adopt her children, promising Linda they would buy a house together, and promising Tammy they would have a beautiful wedding. As I spoke, Danny was handcuffed and being led toward the gymnasium exit by federal agents. His face showed no remorse or acknowledgement of his victims, only the angry frustration of someone whose carefully laid plans had been disrupted. Every promise Danny made was a lie designed to buy time while he accumulated enough stolen money to disappear forever, I concluded. Every relationship was a performance designed to justify increasingly larger thefts. Every tear he shed over our struggling marriage was calculated manipulation to explain his absences while he managed his criminal enterprise. The gymnasium had become completely silent except for the sound of cameras clicking and the shuffling of feet as Danny was escorted out in handcuffs. The dramatic confrontation that was supposed to humiliate me had instead exposed a criminal whose activities had devastated dozens of families while hiding behind the facade of respectability that Sebastian and I had unknowingly provided. As Danny disappeared through the gymnasium doors in federal custody, the full weight of collateral damage began to register throughout the crowd. While justice was being served, innocent people were also suffering consequences they had never deserved or anticipated. Sebastian stood beside me, his face cycling through emotions too complex for any 18-year-old to process. The young man who should have been celebrating his Harvard acceptance was instead watching his father's arrest while learning that his entire family life had been built on criminal proceeds. "Mom," Sebastian said quietly, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise, "what happens to my college fund? What happens to Harvard?" This was the question I had been dreading most. "We'll figure it out, sweetheart," I replied, putting my arm around his shoulders. "The most important thing right now is that you understand none of this is your fault, and we're going to get through it together." Dr. Patricia Reeves, the trauma counselor I had arranged to meet with Sebastian, was already making her way through the crowd toward us. I had called her during the chaos, and she had immediately driven to the school to provide crisis intervention if needed. But Sebastian wasn't the only innocent victim requiring immediate attention. Amy Goldfein's children, Tony and Tammy, had been present to witness what they thought would be their stepfather's declaration of commitment to their family. Instead, they learned that the man they called Daddy Danny was a criminal whose relationship with their mother had been funded by stolen money. I could see Amy in the parking lot through the gymnasium windows, crying while trying to explain to her confused children why they had to leave immediately. Tony was 8 years old, old enough to understand that something terrible had happened but too young to comprehend the complexity of adult betrayal and criminal behavior. "We need to help Amy's children too," I told Dr. Reeves when she reached us. "They're as much victims as Sebastian is. Danny manipulated them into believing he was going to be their father." Linda Brenner's son was also dealing with unexpected trauma. As a teenager who had been told that Danny would be his new stepfather, he was processing not only the revelation of criminal activity but the loss of financial security his mother had promised would come from their relationship with Danny. The elderly victims presented the most immediate crisis. Many of them were learning for the first time that their financial difficulties were due to theft rather than poor investment performance. Margaret Hensley was crying as her daughter tried to comfort her, the emotional impact of betrayal compounding the financial devastation. "Mrs. Hensley," I said, approaching the elderly woman, "I want you to know that Agent Torres will be contacting you tomorrow about the asset recovery process. The FBI has frozen accounts that contain some of your stolen money." "It's not just the money, dear," Mrs. Hensley replied through her tears. "I trusted him like a son. He came to my husband's funeral, he remembered my birthday, he asked about my grandchildren. How do you recover from that kind of betrayal?" Her question highlighted the emotional damage that extended far beyond financial loss. Danny hadn't just stolen money, he had manipulated vulnerable people's trust and affection to facilitate his crimes. I had prepared for this moment by arranging counseling resources for Danny's victims. "There's a support group for financial crime victims that meets at the community center," I explained. "Dr. Jennifer Walsh specializes in helping people process this kind of betrayal." Thomas Martinez approached us, his face showing the anger of someone who had been systematically deceived while his health suffered. "My wife died thinking we had failed to plan for retirement properly," he said. "She blamed herself for our money problems while that bastard was stealing from us to buy jewelry for his girlfriends." The ripple effects were staggering. Marriages had been strained by financial stress that was actually caused by theft. Medical treatments had been postponed due to apparent investment losses that were really embezzlement. Children had been told their college funds were insufficient when the money had actually been stolen to fund Danny's romantic relationships. "The FBI has victim advocates who will help you navigate the legal process," I explained to the gathered victims. "You'll be contacted within 48 hours about participating in the restitution process." But immediate practical needs couldn't wait for legal proceedings. Several victims were facing housing insecurity, medical crises, and other urgent situations that required immediate intervention. "I'm setting up an emergency fund," I announced to the crowd. "Our family will contribute whatever legitimate assets we have, and I'm asking the community to help support Danny's victims while the legal system works to recover stolen funds." The irony wasn't lost on me that I was trying to help repair damage caused by my own husband's crimes, using resources that might themselves be subject to asset forfeiture proceedings. Principal Martinez finally managed to restore some order to the ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen, while today's events have been unprecedented, we still have 93 graduates who deserve to receive their diplomas. If families of victims need to leave to handle urgent matters, we understand, but we'd like to complete the ceremony for our students." Sebastian looked torn between his desire to receive his diploma properly and his need to escape the traumatic environment. "What do you want to do, sweetheart?" I asked. "I want to graduate," he said, with quiet determination. "Dad already stole enough from me. I'm not letting him take this too." The graduation ceremony resumed with surreal normalcy after the federal agents departed with Danny. Principal Martinez called the remaining names with determined professionalism, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed from celebration to something resembling a wake. Sebastian walked across the stage to receive his diploma with quiet dignity, his shoulders squared against the whispers and stares that followed him. When Principal Martinez handed him the document he had worked so hard to earn, Sebastian managed a small smile that broke my heart with its brave fragility. The applause for Sebastian was thunderous, born not just from respect for his academic achievements but from sympathy for the devastating circumstances of his graduation day. His classmates stood in solidarity, creating a wall of support that helped shield him from the curious stares of adults who had witnessed his family's destruction. By evening, the story had exploded across social media and local news outlets. Video clips of Danny's arrest were trending on multiple platforms, with headlines like "Financial Advisor Arrested at Son's Graduation" and "$1 Million Embezzlement Scheme Exposed by Wife." The footage of me presenting evidence at the podium had been viewed thousands of times within hours. The immediate legal consequences were swift and severe. Federal prosecutors filed formal charges against Danny that included wire fraud, money laundering, mail fraud, and elder abuse. Each charge carried potential sentences that would keep him in federal prison for decades, effectively ending any possibility of rebuilding relationships with his victims or his son. Brenner and Associates issued a statement within hours, announcing Danny's termination and their full cooperation with federal investigators. The firm faced potential civil liability for their inadequate oversight of client accounts, and their professional reputation would be permanently damaged by association with Danny's crimes. The three women Danny had been manipulating faced their own immediate crises. Amy Goldfine discovered that her apartment lease was in Danny's name and would be terminated immediately. Her children's private school tuition payments had stopped, forcing her to quickly find alternative educational arrangements. The car she drove was registered to one of Danny's shell companies and was subject to federal seizure. Linda Brenner's new condominium purchase was halted when investigators froze the bank account containing her down payment. Her real estate career suffered immediate damage as clients questioned her judgment and professional associations distanced themselves from the scandal. Tammy Abrams faced the cancellation of her wedding venue, catering contracts, and honeymoon reservations, all of which had been paid for with stolen money that vendors were required to return to federal authorities. The asset forfeiture process began immediately, with federal agents seizing Danny's personal vehicle, freezing bank accounts, and placing liens on property that might contain criminal proceeds. Our family home was red-tagged pending investigation into whether mortgage payments had been made with stolen funds. Sebastian and I found ourselves homeless within 72 hours, staying temporarily with my sister Rachel while attorneys sorted through the complex question of which assets were legitimate and which were proceeds of criminal activity. The psychological impact on Sebastian required immediate professional intervention. Reeves worked with him daily during those first weeks, helping him process not just the loss of his father but the discovery that his entire childhood had been built on criminal activity and systematic deception. Harvard's financial aid office contacted us within a week, concerned about Sebastian's ability to meet his enrollment obligations. While his academic credentials remained impressive, the destruction of his family's finances and the criminal investigation created uncertainty about his college funding that threatened his educational future. The community response was complex and often contradictory. While many people expressed sympathy for Sebastian and me as victims of Danny's deception, others questioned how I could have remained unaware of such extensive criminal activity for so many years. 18 months after that devastating graduation day, I stood in the courtroom as Danny was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The man who had once commanded respect as a successful financial advisor now wore an orange jumpsuit and looked decades older than his 50 years. Sebastian sat beside me, no longer the devastated teenager who had watched his father's arrest. Harvard had not only honored his admission, but provided additional financial aid when the full scope of our family's victimization became clear. His freshman year had been challenging, but he was thriving academically while majoring in criminal justice with a focus on financial crimes prevention. The asset recovery process had returned approximately 60% of the stolen funds to Danny's victims. While many elderly clients would never fully recover their losses, the restitution payments allowed most to maintain basic dignity and security in their remaining years. Margaret Hensley was able to return to independent living, and Thomas Martinez finally received the medical care he had been postponing. My own transformation had been equally dramatic. After losing our home and most possessions to asset forfeiture, I had returned to teaching full-time and discovered a passion for educating others about financial fraud prevention. I spoke regularly at community centers and senior facilities, helping people recognize the warning signs of investment scams and elder abuse. The victim support group I had established grew into a nonprofit organization that provided counseling, legal assistance, and financial education to families affected by white-collar crime. Sebastian volunteered with the organization during school breaks, using his story to help other young people cope with parental betrayal and family destruction. Amy Goldfine had rebuilt her life with remarkable resilience. After losing her apartment and facing financial ruin, she moved back with her parents and returned to school to become a dental hygienist instructor. Her children received counseling to help them understand that Danny's abandonment reflected his character flaws rather than their worth as people. Linda Brenner's real estate career had initially suffered, but she eventually became an advocate for ethical business practices and transparent financial dealings. She testified before Congress about the need for stronger oversight of financial advisors and contributed to legislation protecting vulnerable clients. Tammy Abrams found love again with someone who valued honesty over grand gestures. Her experience with Danny had taught her to distinguish between genuine commitment and manipulative promises, making her relationship stronger and more authentic. The ripple effects of that graduation day continued to influence our lives in unexpected ways. Sebastian's Harvard application essay about resilience and truth-telling had inspired other students facing family crises. My victim advocacy work led to speaking engagements across the country, helping law enforcement agencies understand the human cost of financial crimes. The community that had witnessed our family's destruction also witnessed our rebuilding. Neighbors who had initially questioned my awareness of Danny's crimes became supporters of our victim advocacy work. Sebastian's classmates who had seen him face the worst day of his life with dignity remained loyal friends who valued authenticity over appearance. 5 years later, Sebastian graduated from Harvard Law School with honors, his senior thesis focusing on protecting elderly victims of financial crimes. He had transformed his personal trauma into professional purpose, using his father's legacy of destruction to build a career dedicated to justice and victim protection. Standing in that courtroom watching Danny receive a sentence that would keep him imprisoned for most of his remaining life, I felt not satisfaction but a profound sense of closure. The truth had finally been served, innocent people had received justice, and our family had emerged stronger despite the devastation. The graduation day that was supposed to celebrate Sebastian's achievements had become the catalyst for his true education about integrity, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. In destroying our family, Danny had inadvertently created the circumstances that would make Sebastian into the kind of man his father never was: honest, compassionate, and dedicated to protecting others from the very crimes that had defined our past.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.